I started this on a whim 10 years ago.
On the beach?
On the beach, on the solstice. It seemed a good idea to go down at sundown and light a man on fire.
We are like Disneyland in a sense. It's a lot more active and a lot more entertaining than Disneyland, but we are Disneyland turned inside out. Disneyland is about purveying a commodity, and we are about creating a spiritual experience.
Where'd you get all these ideas?
Oh, for me personally, it was being raised by Dust Bowl immigrants who my father was born in 1899. They came west in a Model 8 Ford. Worked as migrant workers. I knew a lot about self-reliance, but then coming to San Francisco when I was young, and then later to live there, I've been there many years. I walked into this bohemian scene I'd always dreamed of, and that had.
Can't base the core of a culture on sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Only an adolescent would think that. The 60s was about the baby boom, this huge age cohort that was spawned and came of age at that time. And one reason it was so exciting was because we emerged out of immense security. The 50s were boring, but the 50s were secure. Families were whole. And as the 60s began and Johnson's Free Society came in, everything was free. Education, food, you name it. The entire hippie cuisine was based on free food. Lentils, bulgur, and those conditions have changed. Young people right now have been brought up in an era in which nothing is secure. Families have unraveled. Jobs, forget it. There's no social safety net. Capitalism has achieved its late monstrous postmodern bloom, and since 1950, I was born in '48. Since 1950, the baby boomers were the first TV generation. Well, the generation now they've been diddled by the media beyond anything anybody could have imagined them. Every value in our world has been commodified. Everything, and if you don't. And in a world where every value, every transaction, every relationship is a commodity transaction, then there will be no culture, there will be no spirituality, there won't really be much of anything. And part of the reason that we've grown as much as we have is that we did something that my generation didn't do. The fact of the matter is, in the 60s, at least the hippie part, the hippies were just avid consumers, really. They were happy consumers. The only people who came up with a critique of it later on were the punks. As unattractive as they were, they figured out what the essential problem was. They figured out they would not sell out. They would not be commodified. They didn't go to big venues. They did their art in garages. And they made it so repulsive that it couldn't be commodified. I mean, that really was part of their idea. We will make this so obnoxious that no one is going to hawk this and sell it, denature it, and rip it out by its roots, and rob it of any reality it ever had in an actual community.
Black Rock Arts Foundation.
Right.
And we're going to fold it into the Burning Man project too, and then we'll be done with
There are
that.
those who say some, maybe only one, but it's this idea, as it always is, when someone comes up with a great idea and it grows and it gets bigger and it grows and people who you wouldn't expect necessarily to be at the founding come and make it part of who they are and what they are, and it becomes, in somebody's judgment, too mainstream. Are you aware of that and know that you don't care?
Well,
it's a false claim.
I agree that there's
danger.
What can happen over time in any institution is that it'll cease to be a matter of discovery and become something that's merely received.
Yeah.
And but I think, but of course, what Burning Man produces is culture and a community, and I think that as long as we design the new institution as meshed with that culture, as being what it wants to manifest, as animated by that, that's really an interesting challenge. We want to last for 100 years, and so we have to find a way that the Burning Man can reinvent itself, and the institutions of Burning Man can keep reinventing themselves and rediscovering things as we did as founders. But as far as it being mainstream,
Can't imagine.
Well, I don't know what by mainstream, I guess they mean mass-produced, mass-consumed, denatured, inauthentic, or things like that. Yeah. And but we've always been the reason we are have drawn so many people is that we represent the virtual antithesis of that. That's why we seem so novel and attractive to people. That's the very essence of our success. So I'm not really worried about that happening.
What happens here at the event is portable monumentality, but added to that is interactivity. Another function of public art is just to orient people in space and create nodes where they orient themselves in a space and to make them feel that they're in a space that belongs to everyone, and where a stranger can go and feel at home and meet people.
We were approached recently by someone who is a consultant with a major American corporation, and they want to reform their corporate culture. And he said the CEO is sincere in trying to change our culture. How could Burning Man help that? And I said, we could find an artist to do a piece of interactive artwork in front of the corporate headquarters. But that's not going to change anybody's culture. It's not going to change your corporate culture. We'd be willing to come in and go to the top and talk to your engineers, because you scratch an engineer. Look at some of the artworks out there. They were made by engineers. And you'll find a creative spirit. And then help you to model your organization along the lines of what we've learned, so that not only to solicit them to do creative things, but then make sure that process reaches all the way down to the person, the shop steward on the floor and the person on the assembly line, and you create a convection current. That's how we try to govern ourselves, so that information passes down, it goes up to the top, and it unites everyone in the process. They're working on a creative project together.
Is that it is interactive. That means that not until people act in relation to it and involve themselves with it, it actually elicits actions from the audience. It's not done until that happens. And what that does is it makes art do something that it ceased to do in the modern era after a while. It generates community around itself. And that's a new standard for public art, really. Art that requires community for its creation, engenders community in its advent, that links people together. Statues of culture heroes don't do that anymore. But this is, we have another organization that's placing art in cities around the world.
What's that called?
The Black Rock Arts Foundation.
Right.
We're heading toward a city with about 100,000 people, perhaps. We'll have to design it so that people can form relationships better within it. That's what we do. We're social engineers. It's one of our skills.
Globally, would have tremendous leverage on events. And then when you get down to the granular level, we're a little like Silicon Valley in this too. We imagine that we create a platform, but it's the people who create the apps. We create the context. It's the people that create the content.
And then people will go home and they won't want to stop being the way they were there. They'll want to do things together with a purpose, with something transcendent at the center, with all these values that the 10 principles at least describe. And they will find 1 million, 10 million applications. Our message to everyone out there is, people talk about applications, apps, on your cell phone, be your own app. We're, we're not going to feed you the app. We'll just help everybody work together so that down to the scale of everyday life, in terms of the relationships you have with the people you see every day in the world, you will be able to engender those worlds with meaningful endeavor. And this goes way beyond a party. What we're purposing to do is to engender in the 21st century a way of life. So, I didn't get into this kind of work for the money. I would have been a lunatic. So, you know, as long as things around me mean a lot, then I'm happy. As long as there's meaning in the air and my heart remains open and other people communicate that way, then I'm a happy guy. It really is that. I think it's that simple for everyone. People are neurotic. They think they need a lot. They're afraid what they have will be taken away. But really, I think that people just want to be. When they forget how to or weren't taught how to, then they resort to lusts of one kind. And their appetites grow monstrous and distended. But that's not. I don't really believe. I don't think all people are good. I think people can be very naughty indeed. But I think it's really as simple as that. People want to be. And so we've got to find ways to be together. That's all. That's my belief.
Larry, would you have a personal memory?
I don't know. I was doing Burning Man well before the project. When I was 12 years old, I would talk in school. I would talk to teachers into letting me do things, and with others, recruit people to make scenery and usually do something subversive in the process, and then explain it to the adults so that they would, accept that. It's essentially the work. My belief is that Sigmund Freud said this. He said there is no true happiness in life except for the realization of a childhood wish. And Burning Man is in that sense, Burning Man, I've wished for Burning Man since I could remember. I just didn't know what it was.
Keep asking me how I started it, and I've got all these stories I tell. The fact of the matter is I remember calling someone supposedly right after I thought of it, but I don't remember proposing to go do that. But I don't remember it because it came out of the black water.
Because when you go there, there's this huge temple, and you get into the temple, and everybody's crying.
Oh, that's because of the temple itself. Yes.
What is this about? So, is it a religion? Did it happen also without you?
I wouldn't call it a religion, but I think it has. If you look at the temple, it's a sacred space. It acts like a sacred space. People respond to it as a sacred space. It is a sacred space. Pragmatically considered, yes, it's sacred. Watch the behavior. People get within 40 yards of these temples. And it's conditioned by, they now have some context for the experience, and they know it's dedicated to those who've died, and is a place of meditation and sukkah for those who grieve their losses. But
but really, it's the temples are often designed in a form bilaterally symmetric, the sacred architecture, and within 40 yards, people lower their voices. No one told them to do that.
Well, so you move from a...
They're whispering by the time they walk in. No one told them to do that, ever. You know, it's the actions of an entire community that casts a spell, that instills a spirit.
But you walk literally. Why do you think that is? Why do you think all those tech people and startup guys and some of the camps are just Googlers?
Well, I think their culture rhymes with ours in certain ways. A lot of the work they do is project-based, and in Black Rock City, the Burning Man event, the majority of the population is engaged in working on collaborative projects that they invent and organize and then give to others, and that's a powerful incitement to effort. It's actually an economic force in a way. There's a theorist, there's a writer named Daniel Pink who says that, and this applies to Silicon Valley in particular. He says that if you, at a certain point, especially when you're dealing with people who feel that they're creative something, that increasing their pay doesn't produce more innovation or more ideas. In fact, it may lessen that. He says what they really respond to are three phases of feeling that they want autonomy, to belong to themselves and feel that what is in them is a vital force that can create. They want to achieve mastery and to demonstrate their competence to others and to use their power in a way that is connective, and finally purpose. And if you look at Silicon Valley, I think Google lets people take, 10% of their time off to pursue any project they want, and they don't dictate what that is. We don't dictate what people express at Burning Man. You know, thousands of theme camps that fill the streets in the same niche that retail outlets would here in London, you know, except at every one of them, no one's selling anything, they're giving you something. It's because of that flow of the gift through people. It has enormous power to not only create serial communion, but also to organize resources. It's really quite
And you think this
amazing.
can be applied to more than a week in the desert?
Yeah, I think it can. I think what we have now is, especially in organizing this larger organization whose mission is to take those values as defined by the 10 principles and promulgate them wherever they might or have or do appear in the world, and that's our simple gauge, and we tell people, at least lately I tell people that we're just building a platform which will help the community communicate with itself and help resources flow through it. But it's that impulse to give that's going to drive that flow, of course. All we've done in the desert all these years is a form of husbandry. You know, the advent of culture is like a natural, it's like an act of nature. We're adapted to create. We're adapted to create it. We just forgot how over the last 100 years. But so we feel that we can aid that to happen, and we say that the project is like a platform, to use a cyber metaphor, like a platform, but every single person who encounters our culture by coming to our event and now immersive events all over the world, has the potential to interject those values and then become
their own application. You know, it's up to them to figure out what they want to express and what they want to do. But if they use these values, then they'll become their own damn app.
Which is pretty similar to when people create open source software.
That's right.
You're talking like software applications.
But this is sort of in the moral, cultural, spiritual side of the ledger, yeah. Oh, yes, we'll grow this year, as a matter of fact. We haven't announced that, but we have an understanding with the federal government that we can increase our population.
But you know that people who bought tickets spend 4 hours in front of a computer to get one, and many of them didn't. Right?
Well, you see, the problem wasn't that it wasn't with the social coherence or our organization of things. It was simply that demand exceeded supply in terms of tickets. And, but that's really exciting to me because one thing that happened, as I say, there are events around the globe that they're not franchises, we don't own them, we advise them, they're part of our network if they honor the principles. Now we're working to elaborate that. And what happened after the tsunami of demand hit our shore, and because frankly now we're you know, it's really funny, we're an event of about 60,000, somewhere between 60 and 70,000 people, and which is smaller than the
if you opened everything,
Ohio State Fair, and yet everybody everywhere knows about it, and it's become the signature of what's cool. And I have to believe that's because we're authentic in certain ways, that people, and they crave a certain kind of authenticity. In any case, the demand that hit us then drained down the shingle and gave rise to waves in these island events that people have founded all over the world, and they started selling out, which is very exciting because now let's work together and confederate, and if one Burning Man is known all over the place, then what happens if there are 50 of them?
Well, I think that given the present heading of the 21st century, the problem of scarce resources is going to take over and drive events. And in that world, an unlimited mass consumption on increasing scales can't possibly work. Everyone knows that. I'll say one thing. I was a bicycle messenger many years ago in San Francisco, and I had an interesting experience. I was barreling across the great thoroughfare of the city and heading for an intersection, and as a messenger you learn to vector your route and judge the field of moving objects, people in front of you, people in cars, and so you can scoot through a hole in it as you arrive at a point up ahead. And I was doing just that, and I saw a gentleman who had crossed and was in about 4 steps of making the far curb, and stopped like a deer in the headlights and looked and stared at me, and it induced such adrenaline in me that time slowed down. So I saw this in slow motion, and I knew exactly what was happening to him. He was thinking with his limbic brain, and he was paralyzed with fear, and then his limbic brain, the fear brain, said to him, "Go back to the last place you felt safe." And that was behind him. So he did, it should be an Olympic competition. He leapt backward, you know, like a stag, and he could never do that again if he practiced to do it. And I ran into him, and I thought, as he lay sprawling, as I lifted him up, I thought, maybe I should explain this to him from my point of view. And I thought, no, I won't. But you can make the case right now in our society that we're like him.
Yeah.
and there's this paralysis of political will, vast confusion about the shape of an economy going forward. This has arrested thought because everyone seems to be caught between fight and flight, and has this powerful urge to go back to something that you can't return to. So I guess we have to go forward.
It's a beautiful metaphor. I mean, we keep having these spasmodic jerks that put us right in our own path.
Keep asking me how I started it, and I've got all these stories I tell. The fact of the matter is, I remember calling someone supposedly right after I thought of it, but I don't remember proposing to go do that. But I don't remember it because it came out of the black water. It just came out and assembled itself in front of me, and I thought, well, okay, I am that, and I must do it. And it's that simple. But also, talk to anybody about their creative process, a writer, a painter, anybody. They'll tell you it's like that, which is why it's so satisfying when you give birth to something, and so agonizing while you're working on it. History, a lot of back in a point in the 90s, around 96, 97, suddenly folks from Silicon Valley began to come in droves. Famously, the Google guys were out. We started in a garage about the same time they started in a garage. And
you had them beat.
And there are things in common. They're project based in the way they. I spoke about this earlier. I know that Google, interestingly enough, gives people, 10%, I think, it's time of their own to pursue any project.
Time, yeah.
Or is it 20? It's 20%.
20, yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be anything that harmonizes with the corporation's intentions. If it does, they own it. That's fine. But they can really, I think they have quite a latitude in what they want to do. And well, everything at Burning Man is project oriented. Thousands of people coming out to do some kind of project. It can be a tech-based project. It could be artwork. It can be anything that you can conceivably call creative. And so that rhymes with the same sensibility. And at the same time, the engineers down there are constantly, facing the unknown. And they're doing something that no no right-thinking person has thought to do before, and of course that's a creed. That's part of our ethos is radical self-expression, and
it's what the people will invent. We're not the creators of the content. We construct the social circumstance that gives rise to this phenomenon, and it is an emergent phenomenon, so we won't be happy until for every person who comes to our event, there's a possible application for all of those 10 principles combined, to be applied to something. We've seen much evidence of it. Things you'd be amazed that don't sound like they'd never come out of Mardi Gras. They never come out of any ordinary party, and thousands and thousands, finally hundreds of thousands of people will be coming to such immersive events, ours or others, and that's when it really gets interesting, and we want to be there to help then everyone who's been affected to communicate and share resources and use the power inspired by the Burning Man on the beach was just a gift. We didn't charge admission, and we didn't contemplate a return. But look what a return it's generated. If you count, in addition to the grant money, if you count the technical support, it's well over $1 million that we do. But that's a fraction of what's.
Do you have any idea of a whole?
A fraction. Most of it is from gifts.
It's huge.
That people fundraise on the internet. A whole patron class has come along.
Do you have an idea of how much money goes total into the, because it's probably the largest crowdsourcing.
It's hard to trace and it's hard to chart. We really ought to try to do that sometime. It would be an interesting statistic, but I can assure you that all that's given in some ways dwarfs what we contribute. But we certainly don't want them to do it. And we've managed to stop, large concerns who wanted to do that in their tracks. One thing, here's a good thing about the gift economy. You can get a lot of really first-rate lawyers volunteering their services. And another advantage of the gift economy, free lawyers. Then the journalists rediscovered the vocation that got them involved, sense of vocation that got them involved in their profession anyway. We cut them loose from their editors. We cut them loose from the advertising side of the business. They were out there alone in the desert with a bunch of other people, and who were enormously enthusiastic, and suddenly. Many times they've come to us afterwards and say, this inspired us to do the best work of our career. And that, over time, has actually created coverage that now transcends some of the early stories that, that hinted darkly at Satanism and godless hippie hoedowns. In the desert.
Forward, just having the feeling of a future, I feel that what I'm doing is aligned with that. And if you have a sense of agency, then you're probably going to be an optimist. And if you don't, and things are just done to you as you imagine them, then you probably listen. I can easily imagine lakes of blood and black smoke.
Further than I can.
As I say, to be part of our network, then we require that they closely align with our values, and we have the 10 principles, and our mission statement says nothing less than all of these 10 principles combined will really do. I cribbed that from Aldous Huxley, and so we look for this organic fit that as an interrelated whole represents a coherent vision, we feel, of a way of life that could be applied in hundreds of ways, and those organizations that are part of that network we're quite happy with. Now we're just looking for more things that are like us, whether they're in our lineage or not, and so our work is taking us around the world to see if we can, Empress, we can.
And you're making it very difficult. Like if you come with a camera, a professional digital camera, they ask you to tag it. It feels like the World Economic Forum in some ways, where you.
Well, we do. We do that. We've always been. Well, that's the interesting thing. We've always been sort of protective of intellectual property. I'm following my good friend. Who just spoke?
John Perry Barlow.
John Perry Barlow, and we did it because we didn't want. So often in our world, cultural trends, culture organically organizes itself in some context, usually in communities that have to struggle and that communities are situated in certain ways that a coherent way of life begins to form, and uniquely expressive things occur. And then what happens is they're exported up to the big grid, and then they're sent back down as an image of a way of life, as a kind of inauthentic vision of being that's dissevered from any kind of immediate experience of social reality.
So
and then that's marketed to us. People are coming to us now and they want us to burnwash them. You know, that's like greenwashing and brainwashing.
So
because we've always said we're a self-service.
So you want people to share among the community, but you don't want
wash your own brain.
You're trying.
Not only do we ban commercial transactions, but on the more positive side of it, we convened what we called a gift economy, which in the entire economy of that city is based on giving gifts. You know, in London here, you know, this nation of shopkeepers, that shopkeeping niche on the ground floor everywhere you go is occupied in Black Rock City by people who are just giving things to people they don't know, public gifts, and that applies to the generation of the art, and and it's affected, it powerfully affected the relationship of people, and actually demonstrated that kind of activity can actually have capabilities that can be that actually generate a certain amount of economic power too.
Sarah from TechCrunch would like to know if Burning Man can exist without all of the money that pours in.
No. No, it really can't. You know, we spend many millions of dollars creating a city, and you don't do that by making stone soup. That requires a lot of meditated organization. And so, of course, we sell tickets. That seems such a stunningly patent fact to me that the history of what you do with money is a moral record. And I'll stand on our history, what we've done. We've just, informing the nonprofit, speaking of money, what we did is, we were an LLC, and what we could have done is what owners of an LLC usually do. We could have just permanently retired altogether, and some of us are getting up there, and just raked out the profits every year and been multimillionaires. We could all be multimillionaires, and instead, at a price that we systematically worked to. We have to follow the legal form. So we drove down and down and down and down, and said the organization could only be transferred to one that observed the 10 principles, and we, of course, created that organization. And so we just took it out of the market context by that adroit maneuver. And some of our best friends are lawyers and accountants, and because that's work that has to be done. So what we did do is gave up that prospect of magnificent returns